I'm Scott Al Miller. It's the 28th of August, 2023. This is my vlog of daily life living in Nicaragua. Today we're going to talk about all the banks being closed, palm fronds, and we're going to discuss some Q&A that we have about, is what you see on the show really what life is like in Nicaragua? Let's get to all that right after the bump. We're going to be out talking about a couple of things today, but I just want to start with one of the dangers of living in the tropics is these kind of palm trees. They're very, very tall. I don't know if you really can get a good feeling for how high above me these are, but these are really, really tall palms. And when they shed fronds, they come crashing down. These things are huge. So we had a few of these, I'm going to show right here, came crashing down this morning. This is not my place, but it's nearby. And this came down, and this is not the first time. I've almost caught it on camera before. This huge thing, I mean, it would, if it hit you in the head, you'd know, right? This huge thing just comes falling down, but it hit the power line, which is right here above me as well, and nearly took that out. It was swinging really hard, and two of them came down today. I've never had two in the same day. So yeah, that's a little bit of excitement when you're just sitting outside and suddenly this huge, it'd be like a giant branch of a tree just comes crashing down with no warning, because it comes from nowhere. And it's a normal part of palm life. It's not a problem with the tree, but holy cow, does it surprise you, especially if you're not used to it. If you're from like the north, we're not used to big things falling off of trees like that as a part of daily life. And yeah, surprising. The same kind of thing when coconuts nearly hit you in the head. I've been almost hit with coconuts and mangoes a few times. So just things to be aware of, that a lot more things tend to hit you in the head down here. So the news of the day. Now, I only heard this from one of my viewers, so I have no verification that this is true, and they heard it from someone else, so this could be a little bit of a telephone game. But the story is that the banks in Nicaragua have been closed. This is, of course, big news to us who have been using the banks. We have no such thing, and it's completely crazy that news outlets believe that Americans would believe things like this. Like, it's not just amazing that such a thing would be said when there's no foundation for it. It's also amazing the things that the news thinks they can convince Americans of that are so implausible, and yet it works. People are constantly believing the silliest stuff. Like, no wonder the US government is able to convince people of just anything, or random people, salespeople are able to convince people of just anything. It is so easy to be like, oh yeah, all the banks are closed. Really? Really? So how is Nicaragua functioning? Why would any government do that? And completely stop the ability to have businesses, get taxes, do anything? Who would they be hurting? Themselves more than anybody, right? Like, I mean, obviously it would hurt the people, but the people would just move to a tax-free system practically overnight. Yeah, it would cripple the economy. Yeah, it would destroy lives. Yes, it would be absolutely awful, but people would broadly not starve. They would move to a non-banking infrastructure, but governments depend on banks to be the mechanism that oversees the flow of money, to verify taxes, and to stop money laundering. Once you take the banks out of the picture, and people, I mean, so for example, something that would happen very quickly is people would realize that cryptocurrencies would work around that, so they could be on Bitcoin and stuff like that and making payments that way and be completely under the radar or over the radar or outside of the radar scope. There's a puppy. We're on the show. And other people would move to just bartering on things, which, of course, how do you tax bartering? You don't. And just all kinds of mechanisms would spring up literally overnight. They would have to. And people would still use outside cash, but they would bring it in as cash. And of course, tourists wouldn't be able to come to the country because they would have no mechanism for taking or making payments. Like, everything would completely stop, and it would be nuts. There's no way I'd be making this show, right? If there was no banks. There's no way that your friends would be coming here to visit if there were no banks. There's just the number of things. It's kind of like when I was in high school, I had a physics teacher, and this is meant to be a thought experiment, and I think it worked, and she said, well, I want you to imagine a world without friction. And to her, she was not a very good science teacher, to her, friction referred to things like you would slide across the sidewalk, which is totally true. But she forgot what friction actually is, which is the macro scale, easy application of the fact that any two objects can't exist in the same space at the same time. And so in reality, if you had no friction, it would also mean that the entire universe would turn into a black hole as fast as the speed of gravity of terminal velocity would allow. Right? Everything would just collapse in on itself. That's the most dramatic thing. But there were other things. You'd slide across the sidewalk. I'm like, well, your shoelaces would just come right out of your shoes, right? Like the things that hold everything together would instantly release. The whole, even if you didn't look at the black hole problem, everything would fall apart. It would be so much more dramatic than you sliding across the sidewalk, right? And she never thought about those things. It was like, oh yeah, no, that's the actual dramatic stuff that would happen is, you couldn't keep any clothes on, right? Everything would fall off. Your skin would fall off, right? Like your organs would not function at all. You'd have no capillary action. You'd have just nothing. Nothing would work. Every single thing, every living thing, every mechanical thing, everything anywhere would stop functioning instantly, and that would be the end of it, right? We'd all be dead, and the universe would collapse in on itself, because you're saying what happens when we fundamentally alter the laws of physics. Well, when you're talking about eliminating banking and closing all the banks, you're basically doing the same thing. You're taking a physics level problem and saying, what if we fundamentally alter the concept of finances for an entire country? Well, it's not just that people are going to have to wait a long time to get their money and work in cash. No, everything will fail. Everything depends on the banks. That's how the companies move their money from one company to another. That's how you manage to go to a business. You would have massive robberies everywhere because you would know everyone was dealing in cash all the time. You would know that a big store had to be full of cash if it had money, if people were functioning, right? The value of robbing someone would be huge, and there would be nowhere to store cash. So you would know that it's not just, oh, they have all their cash for the day. They have all their cash for all time, right? It has to be moved around and be just sitting in piles if you're still using cash. Or you go to cryptocurrency, and just everything would fall apart, and it would be everywhere, right? The news would be like, my gosh, the mayhem going on from this country that has completely altered how people deal with money. And what does closing all banks entail? Does it mean that no one's allowed to lend money to anyone? There's much bigger ramifications. There's the what are you going to define as a bank? Of course, you can close the existing registered banks. But if they close, people start functioning as banks instantly, right? And we use terms like self-banking. Are those things affected? That's when, a parent company is holding cash for its small companies so that it acts as a bank, so that its smaller businesses are able to operate without carrying unnecessary amounts of their own money, but they have a central holding that is their private bank just for them, right? And of course, legally that doesn't qualify as a bank. It's not public, but is that a bank now? Does that get shut down? This is such a big, weird thing when you start playing with the physics of money. And so could a country outlaw banking? Yeah, much more easily than it could remove friction from the universe. But is it a realistic thing to say a country is going to suspend banking and close all the banks? No, it would cause an instantaneous failure of the entire system. I mean, absolute failure. So if you think about the United States, now this goes back a number of years, but we had this too big to fail thing. And that was partially because they were able to trick the people. It was, again, very easy to convince the people that things were going on with banks that weren't. And on a very small scale compared to the whole nation, the government used that as an opportunity to seize some banks. But the talk was constantly about they're too big to fail. Right? Because the banks are necessary. And even if the banks are doing bad things, we cannot let them go away. The number of innocent people who will get hurt is too high, and it will cause a ripple effect. It won't just be, oh, we ruined these 100,000 people's lives. Yes, but those 100,000 people are now not going to make their payments to other people. And good luck trying to make them, because they're just going to pass a lawsuit onto the bank, and the bank's just going to default, and it's just going to be default after default after default. At the end of the day, if there's no money, well, there's no money, right? You can sue all the people you want, but if there's no one to pay up, there's no one to pay up. And if they, you know, you say, well, they'll go to insurance, but the insurance is going to default, right? Like, they knew you can only have failures of such a size before it's too big and you're going to bring everything crashing down. Everything's too interconnected. Same thing happens anywhere. It's not an American problem. It was that particular day, but it's not an American thing in the general sense. Every country is interconnected. Everybody depends on banking between countries, between cities, between businesses, between individuals. People use banks everywhere. You just can't do that. So the degree to which this is implausible, the degree to which there's no way this would be a casual news story, this would ripple across Central America in hours. It would cause a disaster of such epic proportions. It would cause American banks to start faltering because they're on the edge anyway, right? Like, this would be so bad that there would have to be some kind of intervention instantly. And of course, none of that is true. None of that is happening. That is such a ridiculous statement that, and here, no one knows anything about it, right? I said it immediately to Nicaraguans here. It's a very sleepy dog. And they're like, I don't understand. So Americans are being told that our banks are closed? Which banks? I'm like, all the banks. They're like, I don't understand. This bank? Yes. But this bank? Yes. Like, all these are open. I'm like, I know they're open. Like, it's fake news. This is what it's like in the US. They say things like this and people sometimes believe it. They're like, how do people believe things like this? I'm like, I don't know. But this is real. People here do not understand how crazy the news is in the US. The things that are being said on the news are just, it's not like, the parade today was canceled, one parade, and like, you might be able to get away with that. Like, that's reasonable, a parade could get canceled. That's not what's happening. They're saying like, all parades are canceled. Really? But they're on the street every day. Like, we're out in the parade, we're in a parade and we get these news. And you're like, what? It's so weird. I don't know. Anyway, that's the little news of the day. But today's real topic, I'm going to talk about some of these beautiful new homes that are being built everywhere. This is such a great area. There's so many houses for sale in this neighborhood. I'm in Veracruz, if you don't know. I'm here quite often. It's one of my favorites in the whole city. That house was just built. Or it's not quite done, but it's really close. And so one of my friends, I'm not going to go into the details of the conversation because it was a conversation, it wasn't a post. But he had a number of things. He was here in Nicaragua for a little while, for an extended period of time, and so got some feedback having lived here and had some comments for the show. And so one of the comments he had, I'm just going to go through some of these that I remember and address what I can because I think some of it's important. One of them is he said, you must have an income greater than $30,000 a year, US, to be able to maintain the kind of lifestyle that you have down here. And quite often on the show, we talk about budgets and stuff, but sometimes we talk about, could you live on $1,000 budget, right, per month? And you can. It's lean, but you can. And then we have an episode where we talk about, what if you had a $3,700 budget, like, wow, per month, which is like $40,000 a year, and you'd be doing great with that, right? Like, that's really, really good. So we've talked about those ranges. So 30,000 falls well into that range, right? That is less than $3,000 a month, but not much less, about $2,800. Now, keep in mind, I have a family of 4, right? $30,000 a year puts us below the poverty line in the United States. Okay, so we're not talking about a lot of money. We're talking about less than double income on minimum wage. We're talking about a very low amount of money in the American sense of things. I think they've altered this road since the last time we were here. And yes, for the lifestyle you see of me here, family of 4, I have an income in excess of $30,000 a year. That is true, right? So if you're watching the show and think that I'm living on $500 a month, you're going to be surprised, right? Like, I have one of the largest houses in the city. I live in a very, very sought after general area of the city. I go out and do a lot of activities, right? I go out to eat all the time. I have a staff of nearly 10 just for my house, not for my businesses, just for my house. That's not something you're going to do on a super lean budget. Many of my viewers could afford that without thinking twice. Maybe the average viewer. I suspect the average viewer. But it's not something everyone's going to do, and it doesn't make sense for most people. I have a lot of reasons why I need a lot of staff, and I'm doing a lot of things. Like I have a lot of projects, a lot of things going on here. I'm extremely busy. I need people for a lot of things. So it's a unique situation. And for a lot of the things I'm trying to do to help here in Nicaragua, you know, I'm going out and going to events all the time, partially because I'm trying to help promote venues and bands and stuff, but also because a lot of my friends are in bands and own venues, so we're out supporting them personally as well, trying to, you know, get more attention for them and make a difference. There's a lot of that kind of stuff that we do, and we're constantly exploring the country, partially to bring it to you guys, and partially just because we like to explore the country, right? So we're out going to restaurants and touring around and doing stuff. We own a car. We don't need that, right? We own that for work, but so we have a car and a motorcycle and a scooter, right? Do you need all that? No, you don't. Those are all extra things that I have. So there's a ton of stuff that I do that makes for a much more expensive lifestyle than necessary. But someone who's watching the show may get the impression that when we talk about how cheap things are here, that I may be doing things ultra cheap, and what you're seeing of my lifestyle is that being super cheap. Now, I'm not being ridiculous, right? I'm not living on $60,000 a year, right? So what I'm living on is a reasonable amount of money for reasonable people to think could be an amount of money that people would have. I've never walked this part of the street before. This is really cool. I'm gonna turn around a little bit, let you see. We're in Veracruz and just came up on a corner where there's like the future road, and it just kind of goes off. I think it's gonna go around the corner just back to the main road. It's just funny that this is the end of the road and this is the way it goes around the corner. And there's these little paths they go through as well. So different. And the road here is like, well, I gotta show it. It's like giant pavers, right? Like huge moss covered pavers. I've never seen this type of paver on a road in Nicaragua before. Obviously, I've seen them other places, but here we always use like the small interlocking ones, and these are giant squares. It's very unique. So it's important to keep in mind that I have a larger than average budget. I have a current income. I'm not a retiree, right? I'm actively working. I have a roommate who is also working, right? So we split rent effectively. And that means that, you know, so when I have a staff of 10, I'm only paying for half of that, basically. So that's things to keep in mind. Like those are things that I'm doing very differently than most people. So my budget may be very different than what you're looking at, but the things that I need are very different. Do you need a house with room for 9 people? No, you probably don't, right? Most people I know don't have visitors coming on a regular basis. We have visitors almost every day, and often multiple. We have to be able to house a number of people. It's very important for us. We are running local businesses. We're running foreign businesses. We work all the time. All of us do, because we're all worried. Like none of us are retired. Well, a lot of us have been retired and we're all back out of it, right? Kind of partially because we get bored. But so it's just a very different need, and keep that in mind when you're looking at stuff. But I think that for a lot of people, a $30,000 budget, especially a lot of you, when you're looking to move down, you're looking to move down either as retirees or at least as like empty nesters or never nesters. And I made up that term. Is that a real term? And when you do that, $30,000 is going to be like really, really good. I'm doing it closer to that with 4 people. And it's still really good, right? But there are 4 people, so you have to remember this is not a per person budget. This is a family budget, and they need, you know, medicine and school supplies and computers and all that stuff too. So, and phones and phone service and just all that stuff adds up when you have a family of 4. So things to consider when you're looking at all this, when you're thinking about the budgets and stuff. So that's the first piece. One of his other questions was, or one of his comments was, well, when watching TV here, it was garbage, right? It's a terrible, limited number of channels. Most of them are playing weird content in Spanish. There's a ton of news. There's a ton of like morning shows and Nicaragua shows. A lot of just shots from around the country. Really boring stuff. Now, keep in mind, this is a country of 7 million people and without a lot of money. The gross national product is very low. The per person product is low. Putting out big production, beautiful television just doesn't make a lot of sense, and would be very, very hard to do. And I've been on television here. I've been in the studios, right? I've gotten to see how it works behind the scenes. It's super interesting, and I really enjoyed that. And I've done the same thing in the US, and they're not that different. But the scale is different. Here, there's a few channels for the country. Back in the United States, there's a few channels for every city. And then there's big national channels that group that together. And that's a very different thing. You know, you're dealing with conglomerations that provide shows for 1/3 of a billion people. And here, there's only 7 million, and the number who watch TV is very low. Watching TV, we've talked about this before, is not an activity here. It's something you put on in the background sometimes. A lot of people don't have TVs, tons. And you go to the United States and say, how many people don't have TVs? You'd say, at best 1%. Right? That's probably not true. Maybe it's 2%, but it's really low. And since my childhood, I've known a total of one person, one family, that did not have a television. So my personal experience, which is not that of a super poor upbringing, there was only, you know, it's like in 0.01%. But if you grew up in a really poor area, there's a possibility that it's much higher, right? 1% or whatever. However, even ultra poor in the United States have a tendency to be able to acquire a television essentially for free, because there's so many that they're often just given away. And electricity is not so expensive as to be a problem to use it from time to time. So basically everyone has a television. Basically. Here, there's a lot of, you know, electricity is less available. It's really good, but there's spots that don't have it. And the cost of televisions is much higher. And the culture of watching TV doesn't really exist. Of course, people do watch TV, but it's, buenas tardes. It is, sí. Gracias. It is a very different thing. If people are going to watch it, it's extremely little. And of course, they have access to American television, Canadian television, European television, Mexican television. There's so many places. And so what little culture of watching TV there is an international one. It's an opportunity to see, you know, they want to see the same programs that are being produced for outrageous amounts of money in the US. They want to see the Friends, the whatever, like, I don't know what shows are being watched anymore, or the big Mexican telenovelas or similar. Right, and the same thing here, they have streaming services. So this is really important in that when we're talking about, like, you have access to TV and all that here, well, just like in the United States, people aren't really watching cable anymore. That was a really old thing a long time ago. It has been an extremely long time that modern TV, that the modern way to watch is on streaming services. For me, I've actually never owned cable, not as a child, not as an adult. I've had access to it, but I've never paid for it. And I hate it, right? It's just garbage. There's nothing on. So to me, when he says, well, there's nothing on TV here, well, there's nothing on TV back home. If you're watching cable, that's equal. There may be 1,000 channels, but there's nothing to watch. It's completely garbage. Maybe if you're into the Hallmark thing at the holidays, you could, yeah, the Lifetime stuff and the you know, that's kind of unique and mostly on cable. Okay, like there's some things, but it's limited. I don't think you're getting much less here, and like in the United States, there's no push for cable to have anything of quality, because people who are watching cable are not doing it to save money because it's outrageously expensive, and they're not doing it to get good programming because there's nothing on it, and they're not doing it to get you know, control, because you don't. They're doing it because it's just what you've always done, or there's some really specific tie-in that they're looking for. Buenas tardes. And so you have this, well, I just have it because I have it. And here, people have cable because it's free. You don't get it to get TV. You get internet to your house, and the TV and the phone come with it and reduce the price. They pay you to have cable. Not very much, but like $2, $3. And so who's going to not get cable if you're getting paid to have it? Okay, we have it. We don't hook it up, but we have it, right? The cables are just hanging there. So, like, that's just silly. And I kind of wish we did hook it up, because there's, from moment to moment, sometimes I'm like, you know, it would be kind of cool to just see what is on Nicaraguan TV and just turn it on. But then I'd have to plug in the cable, and it's just not worth the effort of plugging in the cable. But, you know, it could be interesting. Sometimes if I'm in a hotel, I'll turn on and be like, what's the Nicaraguan cable scene today? And it's always goofy stuff and nothing you'd want to watch. And about 10 minutes is all you get. But it is the one way to kind of get the easy news. But all the news is available on YouTube anyway, live. So there's no reason to be, if you want to see that stuff, you can see it from anywhere in the world. You don't have to be here. Same as the opposite. So here, the same as anywhere in the world, Your real programming comes from streaming services, and the same ones everywhere, right? Netflix, Disney, Amazon Prime, HBO, whatever. That's how people watch TV here. So if you're going to the US and you only watch the cable, you'd be like, your programming is garbage. It is terrible. The US doesn't have anything. All they do is show old reruns out of order. There's no, like, it's so crazy. Why do people watch this? You'd be like, are you crazy? People don't, that's not when people say I'm watching TV, they don't mean cable. They mean Netflix or whatever service it is you like, but that's what they mean, right? So the same thing here. When we say the TV is great and like you could come here if you like watching TV, if that's your thing, then you could come here and at least pay less and have a better lifestyle, be healthier food, get great delivery, and still watch TV. We mean the same things you would watch in the US. Netflix, whatever. Hulu's not available here. They really go through some effort not to provide outside the US, but other than that. And of course, you have VPNs and stuff, and even in the US, that's how people watch those things, right? So it's the same here. If you want to see all the different things, you got to do something to pretend you're in a different country. Not condoning that, not saying whatever, but it's the behavior is the same. The opportunities are the same. The costs are the same. So it's the same, right? You really are getting the same experience. We do not notice that we're outside of the country in any significant way with that, right? That's just, it all works just the same. And it works just as well, right? We're getting, or better, right? Now, we lived in Texas. We had really good Verizon fiber, so we had no complaints. We had like never had an outage, never had a problem. All was good. And when we came here, it's basically the same experience. Still have fast internet, still have reliable internet. All those services still work great. Still getting 4K on everything. Like, our kids don't notice, we don't notice. It's been a very fluid experience. So that kind of stuff is great that you're really not missing anything. You're not getting anything better other than, you know, the pizza you order to eat while you watch is cheaper. But what you get to watch, it's essentially the same. So you got to look at it from that context. It was very like, oh, if I just turn on the cable, right, that someone has on in their house, it's going to be terrible. Yes, that's because they're not watching it either. If you turned on the cable at my house in Texas, you'd be like, but there's nothing. Like, yeah, I don't have cable, right? It would just be blank. So if people don't have services because they don't watch TV, but you do have to remember that most of the people you talk to are going to be like, who would sit around and watch that stuff? Like, you just don't do that. Like, yeah, sure, everybody likes to watch sometimes, but for as little as people watch here, having a service doesn't necessarily make sense. And if you think about Netflix, for example, which is very affordable, like I'm very happy with Netflix. If you pay for that every month, it's somewhere around $12. Well, for a normal Nicaraguan, that could be 3 times going out for that. Well, how much are you going to watch Netflix during a month? And how much do you want to go out and do things like go to a restaurant and see a show? Well, here the lifestyle is very much going out, so trading 3 or 4 times of going out for having a Netflix subscription is often a trade-off that doesn't make any sense. They'd say, no, that's not where I want to spend my money. I'm not going to use it as much as I would use the money to go out. I would much rather do that. And for an American, we tend to be much more TV-oriented, and we'd say a whole 30 days of viewing of Netflix for the cost of 1 salad at a restaurant. Absolutely, I'm going to get the Netflix. So the how that cost compares to going out is a really important factor in doing a ratio of how much would I get if I use the money somewhere else, and just the overall people prefer going out. If you said you had to give up going out 4 times in a month in the US in exchange for Netflix, I think a lot of us would say, I would give that up. And in Nicaragua, they would say, I would never give that up. And so that's a key difference as well, just that cultural difference. Another one of his concerns was that the street food that he was getting, now this is mostly meat, right? So I'm not affected by this, but a lot of the street food was of very low quality. So it's worth noting that the time he was here, he was staying in one of the very, very poor barrios. And it is probably true. I don't actually know this, but I'm going to surmise that it is very likely that if you're in a very poor barrio, that a lot of the street food, which is the absolute cheapest thing you can get, is going to likely be of very low quality at times. Certainly not always. And that's something you have to look out for. I mean, certainly the same thing's going to happen in the US if you're kind of going to unregulated markets in really poor areas and standing on the street and getting whatever meat they're selling. It's world over. That's potentially risky. And it may not be risky as much as just, oh, this food's not very good. If you go out, however, it is certainly true if you put in a little bit of effort to like locate a good place. Street food here is excellent. And that's also true almost anywhere, right? Certainly true in the US, certainly true in Argentina, and certainly true in Spain, whatever, is if you're traveling around the world and you find the places that are well known, that the locals are lining up for, that people are maybe traveling a little bit for, not just going to the corner in their neighborhood, and it's only the people who live right here and can't afford a taxi or can't afford a car or aren't willing to wait in a line, and they're kind of desperate and this is what they're able to get. Well, then that's often going to be, well, there's really no competition and the only way to make money is to make it as cheap as possible because that's the market. It might be a little bit rough. We're used to a lot more regulation on food in the United States, so getting food that is actually spoiled or whatever, very unlikely. Happens for sure, but very unlikely. The percentages are very low. If you're exploring the barrios here, yeah, I would, especially if you eat meat, I'd be a little bit more careful. I eat rice and beans, I eat eggs, I eat cheese, things that are very hard to have be problematic, and so if they're bad, you would really know. So yeah, things to keep in mind. Suddenly had a lot of sweat in my eyes there. It's very warm now. When I set off, it was very cloudy and the sun has come out and I'm walking and it's kind of hilly. So it's a little bit warm. It's not terrible. We're actually getting ready to head out to the beach here. Like in my real time as I film, because we have a barbecue going on at a friend's house. So we're gonna be hanging out on the beach, not at the hotel today, which is always a nice change of pace. And I'll get some beach shots for you guys, but that is our plan. So for street food, like anything, right? I think a little bit of effort to kind of look and see what the quality is, look and see, are people making an effort to go to this? So here in this particular area, I live in Sutiaba, and there is a famous asado across from the Uno gas station. So if you're here, this should be enough description to get you there. If you look at the Uno gas station, look across the street on the corner, directly across on your right. So it's the southwest corner-ish thing from the gas station. But if you're on the intersection, it's the southeast corner. Does that help? There's always a line at the asado there. Everybody in the city raves about it. People come from all over the city to get their food. That's a great example of start there and get really high quality meats with really good cooking. And if you want to venture out and do more street food, absolutely, yes, more street food. But pay attention to places that are drawing in crowds. Pay attention to places that are, really look like they're doing a good job, like they're putting in a lot of care, like they're taking care of their food and whatever. That's important, right? And if you're like me and you're a little bit more adventurous and you eat a lot of street food and you just take your chances, we think I've had salmonella this past week, and I feel a little bit under the weather from that. I mean, right now I'm pretty good. It's been a full week at this point, so I think I'm good. And for those who are like, that's scary, no, it's not. The average person gets salmonella and never even knows that they get it. And of those who do know that they get it, which is so less than half, the majority of those people get somewhere between 4 to 7 days of relatively mild symptoms. I had 1 day of slightly less mild and 6 days of pretty darn mild, to the point where I kind of forget that it's going on. But I do feel a little bit, or have, at this point, I think it may be done. A little bit less than perfect, but that's a pretty weak statement. I feel less than perfect, right? Whatever. So those kinds of things are risks, and I take those risks. And like with a lot of things, right? Walking around in big cities carrying the camera, I take risks that I don't recommend other people take, because I'm out here exploring for you guys, right? And because I like to, right? It's not just for you. It's not completely altruistic. I hope it is mostly, but I really enjoy getting out and getting the exercise. I really enjoy exploring new things. I like taking the chances and being adventurous, right? That's part of the fun. I'm not trying to do things that are dangerous. I'm trying to do things that are, what if my camera was stolen? Well, then my camera would be stolen. So often I have locals who are like, it's so dangerous. I'm like, what do you think's going to happen? And they're like, they can steal your camera. I'm like, okay. Yeah, they could. Okay, like that would be unfortunate for sure, but it's not tragic and would not be the first time. So yeah, you account for these things. That's in my budget, right? And that's why I carry around, especially this one. This is the GoPro 9. What's the value on this? It's like $150. And mine's worn out for sure. Like the buttons are having all kinds of problems. It's overheated so many times. Like if someone was to steal this and I was to pay to have GoPro, well, they don't replace. If I had to replace it, right, I'd just get the GoPro 12 when it comes out in a week. But or I could buy a used one of these for like $80 probably. That's fine. Right? I will do that. I get so much footage and so much better footage because I take these chances that, I mean, totally worth it. At least in the statistics we've had thus far, right? If I had it stolen 3 times in the next 3 months, all of a sudden, well, that would change my statistics quite significantly, and we'd have to rethink whether I can afford to be losing roughly 1 camera per month. I mean, I can tell you the answer is no, but when it's 1 every 2 years, yeah, that's fine. Like, obviously, we're going to do everything we can to avoid it. Please don't come out and steal my camera, but it's kind of built into my budget for doing the show, and that is not what we call danger, right? Coming from the United States, danger is a weapon being pulled on you or actually being used against you, not someone managed to get your camera. Now, I don't walk around with my really good cameras as things that are very hard to replace. That would be a much bigger problem. They're also much likely to be damaged. Like this, I could have a struggle with the GoPro, fight over it, manage to keep it, and do fine. Right, it'll survive. Some of these cameras have slammed into concrete from quite some distance. I don't even know. Nothing's wrong with them. Right? I got told later that someone dropped it or it fell or whatever. So, yeah. So that we're talking about food, but so I'm a little bit more risky. But you got to keep in mind, it's a very poor country. There's going to be some street food somewhere that is not great, right? And one of the adventures of being willing to live in a barrio, if you want to live downtown, you want to live in really nice areas, you can surround yourself without becoming an enclave, without becoming American. You can surround yourself in Nicaraguan life that is very high quality, very, just excellent. You don't have to worry about anything all the time. If you want to live in the barrios, you're going to take a little bit more of a chance. If you want to be in the poor barrios, in like indigenous communities and very rough neighborhoods, then that gives you a lot more adventure. It gives you a lot more fun. It gives you a lot more opportunity to become seeped in the culture, to really connect and have a different experience than most people get. Oh, this cute little dog came out to investigate. Hello. Am I in your street? And those things are fantastic. And if that's something that you get excited about, if you're like, oh, that sounds fantastic, then that's something you should do. If you do that, be aware that you're not getting the societal protections of really good food quality inspection all the time, that the community may not be going out and being super diligent about only eating at places that are really good. If you go out and eat with the locals, you may end up in a place that's kind of sketchy. Well, take your chances, gauge that. But if you're wondering, so I think his concern was the street food is terrible. And I don't think he was really going around and exploring street food around the country. I think it was he's in a barrio, and that particular neighborhood had some bad places, which I'm not surprised by. It's a poor area of a poor barrio. Not a dangerous one, but definitely an area that is going to be at risk for lower quality food, let's say, and that was his perception that had happened. And I think if you in the same general area go and seek out some places that are well known for how good they are, you'll find that for really similar prices and a little bit more effort, you're going to find some really excellent food items of the same basic genre, and be like, wow, the food here is amazing and cheap, rather than really terrible and really cheap, right? So it's important to keep that perspective. It's not a panacea. You can't just move to Nicaragua and instantly nothing's bad, right? That's unfortunately not the case. That'd be great if it was, but it's not. There are problems that come with the incredible low cost of everything, and some of that is that there are places where having high quality food can be a limitation. You, as someone who's seeking high quality food, should never be in a position where you can't get it. Right, that's not the concern. It's that if you are not making an effort to get it, there is a possibility of stumbling on things that are not so good. In the same vein, one of the things that hits a lot of people when they come here is just the general sense of it's a lot more poor than I'm prepared for, and having to live around that every day can be discouraging. And there's two ways to look at this. One is, yeah, there's three ways to look at it. One is that that's true, and that may be something you just need to live with. And in reality, you often live around a lot of the same poverty in the United States or in the UK or whatever, but we do a really good job of hiding it up there. And we make it so that it's easy to pretend that there aren't a lot of homeless. It's easy to pretend that people aren't starving. It's easy to pretend that people can afford heat, because we tend to isolate them in neighborhoods where we don't see them, or put them into shelters where we don't see them, or whatever. And here, people who are struggling and those who are affluent are often side by side, and that creates a need for visibility. It means that the poor are not being shuttled off somewhere and hidden. They're very visible, and those with means feel like they need to help them, and often do. And that's a very different take on how society is formed. And if you're coming from a place like the United States, where we're used to people being hidden, it causes a couple things. One is we don't like being confronted with it. And we also react as though seeing it still means that there's a ton that's hidden that we're missing. We're used to what we see being the tip of an iceberg. And here you're seeing the whole iceberg. And so while the iceberg may be smaller, you're seeing more of it. But the emotional reaction may be, what if this is just the tip of the iceberg? And that's a legit reaction. I think that it's not, right? I think you actually get it in your face so much that you're getting too much and feel that it's much poorer than it actually is, which is my second point. When you've lived here for a while, I think most of us start to realize that the country is not nearly as poor as we perceive it to be when we first get here. And I've done some videos on this that I think are pretty good. Our Changing Perceptions of a Country is one I recommend. And, you know, having lived here now for years, I consistently have the reaction of there's so much beautiful, so many wonderful places to live, and so many places that I'd be interested in living, or I'd enjoy life there, or beautiful houses I want to see, and landscapes I want to explore, and so many cars that are decent, and like there's so much so good that I'm often surprised the opposite way. Right? Like, wow, they're doing so well. Wow, life is so good. There's still the poverty. It's still tragic. But the way that it all looks, the way that you interact with it is very, very different. And pretty consistently, when people first get here, there's this shock of, wow, it's so poor. And then later it's like, oh, wait, what I was seeing as poor is, you know, that's literally a tool shed, or that's not the norm, or it isn't what I perceive it to be. It's actually a nice house. It's just not a style I'm used to. You know, things are so different that's a big change. And so that's really significant. And I think the third part is, you know, really learning to be like, well, it's actually something you need to. It's good to learn to live around problems. And potentially see them as something you can help solve, which is a risk, right? So I'm going to say on one side, by coming here, right, you make a difference. By coming and living and spending and existing here, you have a really high potential for making a very positive impact on the things you're concerned about. And if you choose to avoid living here or anywhere because you perceive it as being poor, which may be correct, and you say, I can't handle looking at that every day, I'm going to stay in the United States where I don't have to see it. What you end up doing is not providing the help you could have. So it's more importantly than saying, well, I'm going to not look at it. What it ends up being is I'm not going to assist in a very simple way. And that assistance is, if you were to move, and I'm not trying to make you feel like you have to move because you have to make a difference. If that's what you want to do, donate money to like investment projects or something. Like, there's ways you can do that and be a huge help and not move. But if you're considering moving and the reason you don't want to move is because it's so poor, stop and internalize that a little bit and say, wait, because it's so poor, it makes it so much more important for me to move, because I will significantly offset that poverty by going out to eat, by renting a house, by hiring a taxi, especially by hiring a cook, a maid, or whatever. Every activity I do in that country, every single thing is going to put money into the economy and put food into mouths and roofs over heads. Wow, I could make a difference while making my life better. The act of making my life better could significantly improve the lives of multiple people in real time, real world. And if I avoid it because I don't want to think about it, I'm not just not thinking about it, I'm not making the positive difference that is within my grasp. I could make a difference and I'm choosing not to. If it's only perception, if it's only I don't want to look at it, that's fine. Like, there's a lot of things I don't want to look at. I don't want to see the animal that got hit on the side of the road. Looking at it does not make it not get hit, right? And my desire to not hit an animal doesn't get any higher by seeing it. Like, I'm just not going to hit an animal if I can help it. So that's not a thing I want to look at, because I know I'm already going to take the maximum action to not let that happen. But in this case, not wanting to look at it causes you, in 99.99% of the times, to not take the action that would have made a difference. If all of us who had that reaction said, no, we're going to move, we would end a significant amount of the poverty. It wouldn't become rich, but it would change the unemployment. It would change the baseline by such a huge margin. And so I encourage you to sit and talk and think about, could you learn to see it as an opportunity, learn to see it as making a difference, doing good works simply by existing. You want to do more? Great. Now, that said, I do want to point out, it is extremely tempting when coming here to try to interact not in a straightforward manner, meaning straightforward. I want to move there. I want to, live cheap. I want to, take advantage of the beautiful weather and the beautiful food and the friendly people and the great community and the good live music and the cheap beer and all that stuff. That's what I want. That's what makes sense, right? That's coming here and having a logical difference. It's for you, but you're acting in an ethical way. What doesn't make sense is coming here and saying, I'm coming from somewhere else and I have all this knowledge of how we live somewhere else. I'm going to try to get people here to live that way. And it could be anything. It could be some huge thing. You should change your lives like this. Or it could be a little thing. Oh, this is how we do it there. You should do it that way here. That is destined for sadness for everyone. Anywhere. Imagine living in the United States and Germans coming over and saying, you could make all this much cleaner. You could make your trains run on time. You could have beautiful public transportation. You could eat dinner earlier. And trying to change every little aspect of our lives. You would just find it annoying, right? They're going to get annoyed because they perceive, and so do I, that most of the things they do, not the dinner thing, are better than in the United States. Like if you go to Germany, instantly you're like, why is this so beautiful? Why is this so nice? Why do I like it so much? Well, it's all these little things that they do that come together to make for a really organized, clean, safe society. And you're like, oh wow, that is all cool. Do you want to do that in America? No, we have no interest in doing that, right? We're a different culture. And it's an uphill battle. Like, everyone has to do it. It can't just be me wanting to do it. You have to get everybody to do it together, or it doesn't make sense. You don't have the volume. Like, you can't just switch to on-time trains, right? You have to put in train tracks. You have to find millions of people who are willing to commute by train. You have to get people to give up their cars. That's a lot of steps that are huge, and one person can't make those changes. The same thing here. You can say, let's put in hot water everywhere. Well, you got to put everywhere, right? You need to put in plumbing for that. You need to think about how you're going to do it. You got to come up with how you're going to pay for it. And you got to come up with a value to make it make sense. And they're all like, but why? I don't know why you're doing it. I'm not going to do it, let alone everyone. You're never going to get that volume. Trying to push people to do it as a society is going to make them frustrated that you're not respecting their wishes or respecting their culture or their history or their situation. And it's going to make you frustrated because you think you're trying to help and they're not appreciative of it. So both parties end up being unhappy. It's not a thing that makes sense. And it doesn't make sense anywhere, right? It doesn't make sense doing it in America. It doesn't make sense doing it here. If you're from a place, right? If you're American, you're from America, and you think America should not use daylight savings time, then it's okay to get up and rally about we're doing something stupid because we have the context. I'm an American. I know why. This is why. And this is stupid. And we could all do better by just not being stupid, right? Oh yeah, we should all rally around that. And like every American's already on board with that. There's some politicians being paid off by heaven only knows who. Who wants this, right? Like, it is the stupidest thing. There is no person I've ever spoken to who ever said, you know what, I would actually consider daylight savings time. Never once. I've never heard a logical argument for it, not a thing. And yet somebody wants it so strongly that there's no consideration of ever getting rid of it, only going to it full-time or part-time. So yeah, weirdness. But But in your own society, it is good to try to make changes because you have a lifetime of context, and it is your context, and there's no one to make those changes but you. It is you changing from within. As an outsider, it really should never be our role to try to change things. There's too much we don't understand, whether history or finances or context or whatever, or just cultural desires or what's appropriate or inappropriate. And it can be the simplest thing. You know, we could solve this simple thing. Yeah, they know that. Right? Like they've had centuries to figure that out, and for whatever reason the decision is made, and just suggesting it again, you know, it's every day, right? Monday morning quarterbacking. Oh, I know you decided to do this thing using these materials, but if it were me, I would. Yeah, but it's not you. It's a different situation, and they probably thought that through and decided based on a lot of factors that we just don't know, whether at the time or now. It just you wouldn't make you happy, it doesn't make other people happy. So it's a thing that's so tempting because we perceive as coming from a country where things are so much better. And it's like, well, we could do all these things here. Well, maybe, but maybe not, right? And do you want to, right? A lot of the things that people want to improve, like, well, there's a reason we don't live in America, right? We came here, most of us, because we think it's better here. Well, if this is better, why do we want to change it? Well, there's tweaks. Of course there are, right? I wish we could make those tweaks in America too, but we can't, not realistically. So it's a really tempting thing. Everybody has it. And it's similar to the business thing. Like I'm sure that my business idea is going to work when it doesn't make logical sense for anyone else, right? Local companies have tried it and decided it's a bad idea or avoided it because they think it's a bad idea. As an outsider, there's no chance that it's going to be a good idea for us, right? We're so much less information, so much less guidance, so much less knowledge of the situation. There's no way we're going to be the ones who get that right. But it's so tempting to be like, no, it must be a good idea, right? Because we don't have that context to tell us, no, it obviously isn't, like the locals do. And it's the same kind of thing, right? It's not business. We're not trying to make money, but we're trying to make a difference. And we just don't have enough information to know instantly why people haven't done that thing, because there's been expats here for forever, right? So anything that you think of, right? Why isn't there hot water? Trust me, over 100,000 expats have asked that question already, and the discussion has happened with every single one of them, and they've come up with, okay, no, they don't want hot water in most circumstances. And it's not don't want magically to have hot water. It is the set of things necessary to achieve hot water together don't make sense. Someday in the future, maybe they will. For you individually, of course, you can put in hot water. But if you're trying to convince society to have hot water, you're not going to win that battle. It just won't make sense for everybody. Thanks for joining me. Get down in the comments. Let me know what you think. Ask your questions. Leave your comments. Hit that like. Subscribe if you haven't. Share with friends. I will see all of you tomorrow.